Now, what's so curious and confounding about Ecclesiastes, it acknowledges these disparate seasons we find ourselves in. It names our unique experience while always coming back to the great unifying principle of our finiteness. We all share a common destiny, the failing of our bodies and the transition of our consciousness. Well, today, as I said, we're going to think a little bit about what it means to actively digest and process our lives as they are. We're going to think about time. We're going to think about the epistemology of experience. We're going to talk about deep wisdom. And then before you go today, I want to give you a summertime spiritual practice for the go. Now, full disclosure, I do want to play with the ideas of home and interiority in a couple of ways today. We are going to spend some time thinking about the spaces in which we feel safe, the spaces where our domestic and our relational lives unfold. These are places where we make our food and where our affection is shared with others, and where sometimes people leave Lego out for other people to step on in the night. That's actually true. Now, I do also want to explore these ideas through the lens of our experience as conscious individuals. And you might say to yourself, it's far too hot in here for me to think about what you just said, Scott. What do you mean exactly? Well, let me use the poet David Whyte to describe it. He describes it this way: how we can spend so much of our time working, we can spend so much time paying attention to our relationships, to our travel, and to our vacation plans even, that we, quote, neglect the necessary internal skills which help us to pursue, even come to know, and then sustain a connection with the person we find inside. And neglecting this internal connection, we can easily make ourselves a hostage to the externals of life, Whyte contends. And I don't read Whyte to you because I think he's suggesting that your internal self is somehow completely unattached from the world that you love and you create and you emote in. No, not at all. I think that's going to become clear as we talk today. But what I want you to walk away with, as you head out into the world, into this beautiful afternoon, I want you to have this acute sense that your connection to your interior self lies at the heart of what it means to be a human being. Or put another way, to digest and to assess and to integrate your life, that this is spiritual life, that this is holy work. And to do this, I want to parachute us into a wisdom text from the Hebrew Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes. And before I drop you into that, I want to give you a couple of handles for what we're going to read today. The first is this, that the wisdom of the text is attributed to this mysterious narrator, somebody called Kohelet, and I'm going to say that name a few times. It's not the name of an actual person in history, we don't think. It's a pseudonym and a title given, and it derived from the Hebrew verb meaning to assemble. And given that the Greek word for the word to gather or to assemble people, the Greek word is ecclesia, and this is actually where we come to call this book called Ecclesiastes. Okay? And then second, most scholars agree that the content and the vocabulary of this text indicates that it was composed sometime in the post-exilic period. And the only reason that matters is we need to understand that some of the angst that we're going to find here, it's rooted in the fact that the Jewish people in this time were struggling to maintain their identity and their theology over and against major empires of the time. Okay? And what Kohelet does throughout the text is explore the rhythms of life and then try to build a theology and build some meaning. And all the way through, he's trying to reconcile difficulty and doubt and the certainty of death even with what you might call a theological perspective. And to be honest, the theology of Kohelet isn't particularly hopeful. The author does say repeatedly that everything is meaningless. And by the way, going to Ecclesiastes for meaning or for theology, it can sometimes then feel like going to a bad therapist. Can you imagine doing this? You pay money and you go and you sit down, you share your ideas, your deepest secrets, only to have the person shrug and say, none of it matters, right? Like get a new therapist, right? But here's the catch. That's not everything that Kohelet says. And in this way, that the text has a way of maybe becoming inaccessible to us because there seem to be these contrasts in it. And this is also probably why you've been unlikely to have heard a sermon from Ecclesiastes. But if you have, it was likely taken from these famous lines. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. Time to be born, time to die, time to plant, time to uproot, a time to weep, a time to laugh, to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to search, and a time to give up searching, a time to keep, and a time to throw away. And he goes on and on. I can't read you the entire list today. There are actually 14 of those offsetting pairs included. And they are famous because of their poetic symmetry, I think. I also think they're famous because this is one of the places where we can look at it and we say, I think I know what the author's trying to say here. There's an attempt to lay out the wide expanse of experience, while, according to the author, trying to make sense of how God might be source of it all. And to do this, the author is using a poetic device we call merism, where you take two extremes, and you use them not just as two offsetting ends, like being born and being laid to rest, for example, but in using pairs like this device intends that you consider everything in between. And I think this is why, if you've been exposed to Ecclesiastes ever before, you've heard this passage. Because there's a powerful locating property in these words, as there would have been for an ancient audience too, I think. Where as you listen to the pairs, as I read them earlier, it's as though you're taken and you're placed on a map of your life. It's not unlike when you drag that little character in Google Maps over onto the map to get Street View, right? Hearing these words, you see and feel where you actually are. Sitting here today, maybe you're feeling your age. And the summer sun and the warmth has a way of flooding your memory with these appreciative moments of exploration and the vibrancy of your youth. Maybe some of you, you're resting, you're vacating in this season. It's helped you to sense the ways in which your body and your mind have been stretched too thin. You feel like, I think some adjustments need to be made. Or maybe you're exploring a new relationship and you're feeling the best of emotions. Alternatively, you could actually be grieving and wanting to uproot your life. Maybe just maybe you're somewhere in between those things. The point is that this is a time to, acknowledge where you are. To take time today to name it, to write it down. Pick an adjective, pick a noun to describe your location in the world. And then remind yourself that moving forward will likely include some weeping and some laughing, some grieving and some dancing, some working and some play. All of it, according to Kohelet, in step with divine presence that walks beside you in every activity under the heavens. Now, what's so curious and confounding about Ecclesiastes is that it acknowledges these disparate seasons we find ourselves in. It names our unique experience while also always coming back to the great unifying principle of our finiteness. That whoever or wherever we might be old or young, we might be well-positioned or marginalized, we might be righteous or we might be a disgruntled Oilers fan. Listen, don't let me lose you. We all share a common destiny, the failing of our bodies and the transition of our consciousness. And that admission can feel a lot more like Ash Wednesday than July 21. I admit that, but stay with me because here's my quick take on Kohelet without being able to walk you through everything he says. I think the wisdom here, and I think this actually goes for a lot of scripture actually, it comes less from the most tweetable conclusions that the ancient authors come to. And in the case of Ecclesiastes, it's this ad nauseum, all is meaningless. Thanks, Kohelet. I'm going to keep moving on. I think the wisdom is less in those sound bites and more in the process, in the incisive way that Kohelet models for how to look at the world. See, at the beginning of chapter 9, the narrator says this. He says, look, I look out into the world and I see that the wicked get all that seems to be good. And I see that the good get what the wicked deserve. I look out at human experience, I see all this meaningless toil and trying to get ahead. I see human action at its best and at its worst. And then he says this, he says, I have reflected on all of this. I've digested it all. I've considered how it all lies within the scope of divine providence in some way, and how it all disappears, how it all fades away. And then he says this: go, eat your food with gladness, drink your wine with joy, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, always anoint your head with oil, enjoy life with those you love, all in the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all of your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are all going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. That's a lot, right? To return to the therapist analogy, sometimes when I read Ecclesiastes, I'm like, I can't believe I chose to expose myself to this. It doesn't feel like wisdom. It's a bit of a downer. But here's a thought. These lines feel like a lot because Kohelet is a bit of a buzzkill for a certain type of religious or spiritual sensibility. Or more specifically, those sensibilities or those rhythms that are rooted in blind optimism, or a sense of moral superiority, or a sense that we have somehow secured divine favor. To these traditional ways that we sometimes seek comfort in, Kohelet is quick to say, remember, where you are going, there is no need for such pseudo-wisdom. And this is a big part of what the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible is there in Scripture for, I think. Because it gives this assertion that traditional ways of finding value and authority and security through things like austere obedience to rules or strict observance of religious space and ritual, he asserts these are not the only way to God. Those structures and authority are actually absent from Ecclesiastes as a collection. And in their place is this repeated instruction to use one's senses to encounter wisdom. And I love how scholar Jennifer Coused calls this the epistemology of observation and experience, which is just an academic way of saying that we come to know God, that we come to know ourselves, that we come to know the deep riches of God's grace in the world, in how we sense and how we encounter with our bodies. And Coused points out that in the face of life's deep complexity, Kohelet seems to recommend these everyday pleasures of living. Things like eating bread and drinking wine, beautiful bread and wine, right? And wearing clean clothes and fixing your hair and loving one's lover or friends. It's this kind of bold contention that there is divine wisdom to be found in the valuing of the body's experiences and the pleasures found in domestic spheres. And for me, in a world of political antagonism and systemic injustice and pervasive violence and channels that feed this to me all the time, in a world where I feel like I'm just doing my best to resist the apathy and cynicism that these things inspire in me, I feel like I've needed Kohelet's awareness. And I feel like I've seen it spark in things like the daily brewing of iced tea. I fill the pitchers, I let them cool, and then my kids drink it all before I get to it. I also find it in the longer meals and the laughter we share in the backyard, because we are going to eat outside every night we can. It's in the savoring of tender herbs grown and picked with my own hands. And for you, well, I wonder where you might see wisdom in its approach, in the flavors, in the sounds, in the touch that makes you feel at home. Is it Kool-Aid or is it Pinot Grigio? Is it birdsong or is it in a quiet space in your home? Is it in an intimate lover's touch or is it in the playful glance, knowingly, of your deepest friend? Could it be that the Spirit endorses and inhabits such sacred sensory simplicity? And this is the kind of reminder that Kohelet seems to prompt in us. But as I've already said, it's not the recurring theme of the text. The narrator keeps circling back, time and time again, to the weight of our mortality, how our existence is so ephemeral, how our summer days are so ephemeral. And while the book does close with this encouragement to the reader and to the listener to fear God, to obey all the commands, I assure you, moral adherence is not the ideological takeaway of Ecclesiastes. Rather, it's this imperative to digest and attend to every day, to take note of each passing, to keep in mind that life, that summertime heat and flourishing, that sunscreen and the flowers in your garden, these things will fade. And that can sound like mixed messaging for a fun summer series, but I think we're all better served by this kind of honesty. The kind of honesty that's the foundation of statements like those that we find at the beginning of chapter 11. Where Kohelet says this, he says, light is sweet. It pleases the eyes to see the sun. To which I say, oh, yes, it does. Have you seen the light when it streams in my window at 4:30 a.m.? Have you seen the light as it keeps the sky beautiful as I read at twilight? Have you seen how when sunlight falls, it doesn't matter where it falls, my dog will find whatever place that is, doesn't matter where it is, and he'll find comfort there. It's experiences like this that Kohelet's mentioning. They're some of the sweetest we enjoy. But then, unsurprisingly, the narrator widens our perspective to the scope of our actual experience. And he says this, however many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. And here, Kohelet's, again, downer, seems to be using a form of merism again, where he sets up the glow of light against the gathering darkness as allusions to the waning that comes as we age. And admits in this that while embracing enjoyment and pleasure is spiritual practice, sure it is, so too is recognizing that there are so many hard and difficult moments, aren't there? And this is the kind of admission that taps into the wisdom that I think we all carry. Because you know better than anyone else how the professional challenge and setbacks that you've experienced, these have shaped the acumen and the knowledge that you have. You know how illness and disease, how pain and weakness in your body, how these have formed a resilience that's just part of you. And you know that your most caring, faithful relationships, they're marked by moments of hurt and betrayal and failure and unmet expectations. And it's the fact that you know those painful things, that's what informs your persistence in love. Remember the days of darkness? How could we forget them? And it's as if Kohelet knew something of what it means to admit that our wisdom isn't born from our strength, that our sense of settledness or assuredness, if we ever feel that, or when we do happen to, it's not derived from having sailed through endless bright and sunny summer seasons. No. In writing this centuries ago, I think Kohelet agrees with our contemporary Krista Tippett when she writes, quote, none of us, if truth be told, knows home, knows belonging, knows welcome, tangible or spiritual, without struggle. And that kind of deep wisdom, it's the kind you form every time you do the internal work of facing your memory and pushing toward forgiveness and flourishing. It shows up when you take this introspective approach, so many of you do, to the issues of inequality and responsibility that are needed in the extended backyard, that is your neighborhood, that is this sprawling city, that is our beautiful world. And I assure you, this kind of deep wisdom, it develops in you when you pray and you reflect and you read with an eye for how grace flows freely, both when you feel all is well, but also too in your days of darkness. Which brings me to what I feel is an appropriate place for us to end today, with a practical consideration of how to cultivate this kind of digestive, absorbing, considerate approach. Because to a certain degree, Our ability to create homes and spaces that offer welcome and relief, it's directly related to whether or not we have found our way home to the places of reprieve and peace in our own heart and mind. And this is truth that the mothers and fathers, the mystics and spiritual cartographers of our tradition, they have known so well for a long time. And it's why we shouldn't be surprised that the book of Ecclesiastes has actually been used for centuries by Christian mystics and monastics. It's also why we shouldn't be surprised that Ignatius of Loyola taught his students in the 16th century the daily practice of reflection called what? An examen. And yes, this means that you get an examen in liturgy and you get an examen to go. In it, Ignatius encouraged all novices to cultivate awareness of God, to review the day with gratitude, to take an inventory of their emotions and feelings, and then to pray from those emotions and feelings, and then to look ahead just to the next day with hope. And this is a practice I've found super helpful in my own life for a while. And as I spent time with Kohelet the last few weeks, I found that his questions and his angst and his honesty, these are the things that pop up for me in my examen practice. And so I thought it would be appropriate to encourage you to pick up the examen as a way to digest and reflect with this summer. So here are some very basic instructions. First, you can do it anytime, but I'm going to recommend you do it in the evening as you are winding down, okay? Second, if you aren't already, when you go to do your examen, please put on comfortable summer clothing, and please sit outside, or if you can't sit outside, sit beside an open window. Do not, under any circumstance, do the examen in your work clothes, okay? Cold drinks, frozen treats, highly recommended as prayer aids, but they are not required. Then, start by doing what Padre Gotuma recommends. Say hello to the little world you live in, to your living room, to your patio, to your deck, to your garden, to your flowers, to your camping chair. Welcome God's presence there, where you are. Then, take a few moments to reflect on the day. Take note of the sights, the smells, the tastes, the aromas, the textures of summer. They're all around you. The fading light, the sound of kids in the bath, the smell of something on the grill, the feel of grass on your feet. It could be anything, but just do it at home or in a place of welcome and safety for you. And then ask yourself how aware you were through the day of God, of yourself. Of course, the key here is to not chastise yourself for having daydreamed or having taken a nap or having slowly strolled wherever it was that you were going. Simply pay attention to what brought you life and what caused strain. Think about where the Spirit felt close. Think about where you felt most close to those in your life. And then quietly say a prayer of thankfulness, say a prayer of gratitude or of forgiveness. Pray from whatever emotion is right there with you. And then finally, think about the day to come. But don't let your mind wander too far. Stay in summer mode, okay? No plans for the fall, and August isn't here yet, just tomorrow. Hope that makes sense, even as I hope too that time and this season and your experience and divine wisdom deep inside you conspire to shape your life in hopeful, healing ways.
Hey, Jeremy here, and thank you for clicking through to watch that video. If you're intrigued by the work that we're doing here at Commons, you can, of course, hit subscribe to keep up to date with all of the content that we're posting here on YouTube. You can head to our website at commons.church, and you can find us on all of the socials at Commons Church. You can also join our Discord. There, the community is having all kinds of conversations about how we can encourage each other in the way of Jesus. Head to commons.church/Discord for the invite there. Also, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you and all the ways that you are journeying on this path toward Jesus. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the ways that you contribute to this conversation. Together, we'll see you soon.